Welcome to another fresh edition of Inside Carolina's Next Level. That's Greg Barnes. I'm Tommy Ashley, always sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt, johnnytshirt.com. Let me go ahead and get it out of the way. They are the best place you can go to get your North Carolina swag. They're on Franklin Street. They've been there forever. They were there when I was in school. That just tells you how long that Johnny T-Shirt's been a business on Franklin Street. And they're that way because people support them. And we need your support for Johnny T-Shirt, locally owned, operated, alumni owned, all that good stuff. And the swag is unbelievable. And 10% off if you're an Inside Carolina premium subscriber. Greg Barnes, a lot of eyes were raised late last year, late 2024, when North Carolina really pushed all the chips in on the football side. Bill Belichick was hired, massive amount of money was poured into the football program, and some people with the university and people, fans and all that, sort of raised some eyes on why football and why not basketball. Well, here we are. People can see the crawl at the bottom, $14 million roster uh, allegedly for North Carolina. I'll let you outline why it's not alleged. This is big time college basketball these days. Money, money, money. But Greg, just overall, what are we doing here?
Well, a key component to this, and I think everybody has been following along, is that the House settlement was recently passed. And what the House settlement does is it brings in the opportunity for schools that opt in, and most of the Power 5 schools are pretty much all of them are opting in, that you are permitted to pay your student athletes in rev share up to $20.5 million in the 2025-26 year. And then that number is going to go up by 45% each additional year through the length of the 10-year settlement. And so all of a sudden, there's this new burst of money coming in that can go to fund rosters. And so, for example, with the Bill Belichick situation, yes, you're paying Bill $10 million. You're also increasing what you're paying his staff. But in his line item of his contract was a little note that said $13 million in rev share. So $13 million of the 20.5 is earmarked for football. And that's pretty standard across the country. Each school can determine how much of that rev share they want to use. But Belichick has $13 million marked for his football program. And so when you hear all these numbers for football and men's basketball that have jumped from last year, rev share is a big part of that. And I think that's important for people to understand initially. Last year, Ohio State's athletic director said they spent $20 million on their football program, which won the national championship. We all know that football brings in a lot more money than men's basketball does. But when we're talking about what Ohio State spent last year compared to what they're going to spend this year, it's significantly more. And the same goes on the men's basketball side of things. North Carolina spent $4 or $5 million in that range last year on this roster. And now with rev share coming in, they are going to be able to spend more than that. And as we reported last week, we've been told that number is around $14 million just on the roster. That's not about the staff changes. That's not about Jim Tanner and his $850,000 salary. That's on the roster makeup. And that's a lot of money. That's nearly 3 times what North Carolina spent a year ago, according to our sources. And so when you talk about football receiving this influx of support, financial support, now we're seeing basketball kind of getting the same thing. And one key point that I want to add here, Tommy, is people say, yeah, well, rev share doesn't start until July 1. How does that work? Well, the NCAA issued guidance back in December and said that because they pretty much knew that the House settlement was going to be approved at some point, some iteration of it, that you could do contracts that were contingent upon House settlement that wouldn't have payout until after July 1. So you could go ahead and use rev share money for some of these contracts in accordance with NCAA bylaw just knowing that it was contingent upon House settlement approval and had to wait until July 1 for payment. And of course, that's different than the NIL side of things, which we can get into if you want to.
Yeah, I mean, it's mind blowing to me, the amount of money we're talking about. So folks can understand, Greg, and if you know, and I know you've done a lot of research and reporting on this, sort of comparison purposes for folks, so they understand. You mentioned 4 to 5 last year for North Carolina. We heard a lot of people talking about, oh, if they just had more money, they could have gotten a big man, this and that, and all. And now we're talking 14 million, which ironically they have their big man, but comparison purposes around the country, if you know some similar lots in college basketball that you can sort of pair up with North Carolina or compare with North Carolina, where we're going here with Hubert Davis and his team?
It's a great question, and unfortunately, we don't have that hard data. I believe it was CBS Sports that put out an article a few weeks ago saying that they knew of like 10 programs that were spending at least $10 million on their roster. Rick Pitino at St. John's, after that article was written, because St. John's is on that list, he came out on Twitter and kind of laughed it off. Just kind of laughing about the amount of money that people are claiming to spend. And that's kind of where I was last year in hearing some of the numbers that were being thrown around. A lot of it seemed kind of silly. And even behind the scenes, people were saying, yeah, well, the agents were just putting numbers out there because they want their guys to get good deals. And so while you did hear some stories of players who had no business getting $1.5 million contracts, for example, there wasn't many of them. But with rev share coming in and the understanding that, hey, you can actually buy a team now, if you structure it properly, the money certainly has increased, no doubt about that. But I would say that when we're talking about a $14 million purse, that's got to be near the top of the list nationally. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean top 10? Does that mean top 5? We would just be guessing to say that. I'm comfortable saying that's got to be at least top 10, top 15. We'll see how it plays out. There's still money to be spent around the country. But the key part is you want to make sure that your programs have enough money available to be competitive. And as Bubba Cunningham has said time and time again, you do not have to have the most money to be competitive. You don't have to have the most money to win national championships. And that is true. We have seen that time and time again. You want to have enough money that you can field competitive rosters, and then it's the coaching staff's responsibility to coach those players up to be able to compete for Final Fours or college football playoffs or whatever it may be.
Yeah, I think spending the money takes away that as an excuse.
Yep.
That we've heard across. I mean, coaches. It's not just at Carolina. It's coaches across the country
Sure.
use that as an excuse of to why they aren't any good or why they don't succeed. So let me ask the question: why is it important for Carolina basketball to get back to being Carolina basketball and being on an elite level competitively? The money matters, sure, but why is it important for Carolina to get back to that aspect or get back to that level that they're accustomed to, quite frankly, and the Carolina fans are accustomed to, and not the yo-yo that we've seen? Why does it matter, Greg?
It's a good question, and this is one where I could kind of ramble on for a long time with an answer. I think people who appreciate the Carolina basketball concept, the Carolina basketball family, know what it used to mean in the amateur model world with Dean Smith into the Roy Williams era. And what we saw, I mean, I guess Calipari kind of started it with his embrace of the one and done. I remember covering a game at Kentucky and sitting and watching him talk to the crowd after the game. And he's talking about, it's all about the kids. We're just trying to get the kids to the NBA. That's the goal. It's not so much about the success we have here, although we want to have success. It's about setting the kids up for future success on their individual level. And that's a different concept than the whole, during the season, we're going to do what's best for the team. And then after the season, we're going to do what's best for the individual. as money has rushed into college athletics with media deals, and now that we've got NIL and some of these other things, the Calipari mindset kind of took over. He was kind of a leader in that new world, if you will. And of course, Coach K got into it when he got into the Olympics and the one and done approach. Roy Williams is old school, and that's what a lot of people love about him. And Roy just wasn't interested. We always had these little articles about, Roy's laughing about the green room, right? The NBA green room. He thought that was so funny. And talk about the crap net, and when Harrison Barnes, the thing came out about the Black Falcon. I pulled a quote the other day, and Roy was basically, I don't know what the crap that is. And that was what was endearing about Roy. But it was also kind of an indication that he's not adjusting to the times. And Roy was such a fantastic coach. I think he's one of the top 5 all time. He was such a good coach that even through the NCAA investigation, when recruiting started to suffer, he could bring in guys like Kenny Williams and Luke May, who were not elite of the elite in terms of recruits, because he had a good eye and because he could develop players and was able to win national championships and compete for number 1 seeds and Final Fours, despite not having the level of talent that other schools had who were talking about the NBA, talking about setting themselves up for future success. And what happened was when NIL hit, which is right after Roy retired and Hubert came in, I really think Hubert wanted to embrace what Dean and Roy had done for so long. And in this changing landscape where money's become pretty much everything, it was just a very difficult task. And because Roy had so much success, there wasn't a lot of push around the athletic department to help elevate the program. The point that I've made is, you need adversity to really self-reflect and see what's going on. You need some down years to be like, okay, what are we doing wrong? And because Roy was able to fight against the tide for so long and do it at an incredibly elite level, I think there was some time period there where there should have been some self-reflection. There should have been some reworking of how things were set up. But because there was so much success taking place, it was kind of set aside, understandably. Now we're in a situation where that can no longer be the case. And so for North Carolina to maximize its brand as one of the top, I would say is the top basketball programs in the country, you've got to be willing to put money into that to maximize your brand. We've talked a lot over the years, Tommy, about NIL coming in, about conference affiliation, conference realignment, media deals. All this stuff is tied to money. And North Carolina needs more revenue to help pay for, increase coaching salaries, to pay for rev share, to help assist with NIL. And we got scholarship money. That's important now. How do you do that? Well, you're sitting on a gold mine with the UNC basketball brand. And I think Lee Roberts as chancellor understands that. And so there's going to be a big push to really maximize that branding. But it only matters if the basketball program continues to be one of the best in the country. What you don't want to do is to fall into the world that Indiana and UCLA did for a while, where they just fell off the map. And they were still a good program, but they were not an elite program. They were not a program where every summer you say, okay, well, Indiana's going to be top 10 this year, right? We haven't talked about Indiana like that in a long, long time. North Carolina does not want to get there. And no, North Carolina's not there now. I know some people say they are. North Carolina's a long way from that. But you want to make sure that you maximize those opportunities. So how do you do that? Okay, you make sure that you have staffing in place. The big part of that in today's world, with agents being so prevalent, is you got to have a general manager. So in comes Jim Tanner, great reputation. So you got to pay him a lot. He's going to be building out his staff in the months to come. That takes money. And then you've also got to be able to have money from rev share to go to be able to pay for players. And you've got to have people in place to help set up and foster some of these NIL deals, which are not coming from the university, but it's coming through commercial entities. But the university can help play a hand in getting those set up. So all that requires money to get the program on a steady level where they can be like in 2024, you win the ACC regular season championship, be a number one seed. That's what you need. That's where you need North Carolina to be, is to play at this level so you can demand the most money when you get into the branding aspect of things.
So, and this is a question, and I've said this a lot. Carolina family, going to school at Carolina, wherever, whatever school, it's not about that anymore. It is about a paycheck, Greg. I think that's what it's become. Fair?
Yeah. It's a difficult question. Now, let me phrase it from this perspective. I understand where you're coming from, and I'm not going to necessarily disagree with you. However, John Curry, Wake Forest athletic director, said something a couple weeks ago at the North Carolina Business Leadership Conference that I think really resonates. I think people need to understand it. But like Major League Baseball, free agency, has taken place for 50 years. And it took a long time for players to get to the point of understanding that it's not all about the money, that it's about fit, that it's about setting yourself up in your family for future avenues. And that may be, hey, I need to be in this town, or I want to play this position, or I want to take a little bit less money and play for a really good team instead of taking the most money and playing for a bad team. Like, that's a long process that has to occur for people to understand that. As Curry pointed out, right before NIL and before COVID, everybody on a basketball roster, everybody on a football roster from number 1 to number 85 got the exact same stuff. And now, essentially overnight, all of that's changed. So I think there's an initial bum rush to chase the money. I do think this is a transition period. And I do think we'll get to a point where people realize, okay, there's money all over the place. I'm going to get paid. We have this NIL Go process in place where a couple years down the road, we're going to know, hey, a starting center for an ACC team makes about this much money, or point guard may make this amount of money for a SEC school. You have an idea of where the money is being allocated and how it's being paid. And at that point, then it becomes, okay, well, I got to make sure I have a good connection with the coaching staff. I got to make sure I go to somewhere that has good academics. How do they set me up for the future? So all those things, I think, will continue to be important. I agree with you right now that it is heavily about money. I don't think it's going to stay that way. And the other thing I want to say about that, I don't like the conversation that I've seen from some that say, oh, well, players have just changed. They're not like they were years ago. No, the difference is they have options now. They have choices now, right? I was in school 30 years ago. I was in classes with football and basketball players at the University of North Carolina. If you're going to ask some of those guys back then if they would take $500,000 to go play at Duke, you're telling me that they would say, oh, no, I'm too principled for that. Come on. The only thing that has changed with kids these days is now they actually have options. They can actually transfer without having to sit out a year or two. It's beneficial to the student athletes like it has never been before. But that doesn't mean they're bad people all of a sudden. So I do push back on that idea pretty heavily.
Imagine 30 years ago a North Carolina basketball player transferring to go play for NC State.
Right.
Unheard of, though. But you toss in, like you said, some of those incentives, then it happens. And I don't blame people at all on that. I think it's interesting. Once upon a time, you went to big schools to get exposure. You wanted to go to Carolina. You wanted to go to a school that was on TV all the time because you needed to get exposure for potential NFL or NBA or Major League, whatever. Nowadays, you can go anywhere to get seen. And to your point, eventually it's going to be nowadays you can go anywhere to get paid. And the fit, the vibe, the cultural fit, the coaching staff, all those things are going to come back in and matter more than maybe they matter right this moment. It's a crazy era. Greg, we said we were going to keep this show short. You mentioned Jim Tanner. He's done his work, gone overseas and gotten Luka, gotten guys from across the country to rebuild this roster. It is fascinating to me that Seth Chimble, Zayden High, and James Brown, three North Carolina players wore the jersey last year. It's just like we've talked about on other shows, a new era for college athletics. Certainly a new era for Carolina basketball. Your final takes on this? I think it is just for old heads. It is tough to wrap the head around for sure.
It is, and we talked about this a decade ago with the one and done situation. But I do think a key part of this process, and we've seen a few teams be able to do it, but it's maintaining some continuity and some consistency in your roster from year to year, and it's very difficult to do. But I think that's the value in a guy like Seth Trimble, because he's been around the block. He understands what this coaching staff wants. He's going to be a leader for this team, and that is critically important. I think the same with High and Brown, understanding what's expected of them. That translates and that allows those guys to be leaders in the locker room and on the court in terms of expectations and what North Carolina basketball is about. The coaching staff, obviously, all being Carolina guys, that helps in that regard. I know there's some criticism about that approach, but in terms of making sure everybody coming in understands and appreciates what Carolina basketball is about, that's certainly a positive of that approach. And that is a unique aspect with there being so much roster turnover. But it's just a matter of you've got to be able to evaluate quickly. And that's the need for a general manager like Jim Tanner. You've got to be able to evaluate and you've got to be able to build a roster. And that's the difficult thing. Coaches like Roy Williams, since we know him so well, he had a system in place. He knew exactly what he wanted to do on the basketball court. Therefore, he knew exactly what he needed in terms of pieces to fill all those roles to do his system. And that's one of the questions for Hubert is, what exactly is he wanting to do? And once you make that determination, then you go out and get the pieces for it. I think the question that most people have with the current makeup of this roster is, what do you do about point guard? Do you need somebody like Elliot Cadeau with him leaving? Do you need somebody in that frame where they really drive the show? Because if you do, maybe there's question marks about this roster build. If Hubert has something else in mind and has some changes in place where it takes the onus off of having a lead dominant guard, and you can use somebody like Kyan Evans, who wasn't the number one guy for Colorado State, but he did have some success kind of running the offense. Maybe that's enough. And maybe Seth Trimble is a guy that you can move into a point guard type role as well. And maybe having those two guys on the floor at the same time accomplishes that goal. That's all up to the coaching staff and what Jim Tanner wants to do, how they want it pieced together. And that's the fascinating part of all this is, I'm not smart enough and I'm not a good enough basketball mind like Sean and Rel and Rob to look at these pieces and say, oh yeah, well, they're not going to be any good or they're going to be Final Four worthy. I have no idea. I like the pieces, but it's how well Hubert and his staff put them together and how quickly that system gels and the team gels. That will determine how good this roster is. That is a new challenging dynamic because you have to do it year after year. Whereas Roy talked about coaching for the program. So he may play somebody in a game in December knowing that it's not really about the next spring. It's about a year or two down the road. Those days are pretty much over, which is a unique dynamic.
Yeah, you better be malleable as a head coach, and you better be, to your point, quick to evaluate, quick to get the pieces in, and then you got to put them together. I think the new era puts a premium on coaching ability. You got to have the money, you got to get the pieces, but you better be able to coach them up and to get them to play together because there's building chemistry was a year after year thing for ever, and now it's a 3-month, 6-month thing. I mean, guys reporting this summer for a season that starts in November. It's going to be crazy to watch. But one excuse, and one, not really an excuse, but one part of it is off the table, and that's the money aspect. Carolina has put the money into this roster. Now it's up to Hubert Davis and his coaching staff to put them in position to have success. Greg Barnes, any final thoughts, or are we getting out of here?
Yeah, I think it's crazy to me that we've gotten to a point where this type of money is flowing into men's basketball. Just knowing that, with college football, we've talked before, SMU and Clemson, just by making the college football playoff last year, got a $4 million check just for those schools. It takes years and years of reaching the Final Four for UNC to make that kind of money, just because the money is not there in the NCAA tournament. And part of the back payment for the house settlement is coming out of that distribution. So Carolina is probably going to be getting $1 million or $2 million from the NCAA tournament for the next 10 years, which is really nothing. So there's just not that return on investment in terms of your postseason success in basketball that there is in football. But that return on investment really comes in the form of fans and boosters being able to enjoy their team. But at the same time, what we talked about earlier about the branding and making sure the program's in a good spot for future revenue streams. That part of it is fascinating to me. I never would have thought a basketball roster would deserve $14 million, but here we are, and it should make for a fascinating year next year.
Absolutely. Stay tuned to Inside Carolina as we cover it all. Greg Barnes, of course, be in the deep grass, digging out all the great stories and all the important stories that sort of keep this machine rolling. That is the University of North Carolina Athletic Department. Johnny T-Shirt, JohnnyT-Shirt.com. I'm Tommy. That's Greg. We're out of here. It's been next level. Thanks, Greg.
Thanks, Tommy.